I don't want to talk about what I do. I just want to put photos up so you can see for yourself. Like, this is what I do. Here's where I go. This is my style. Here's the colors I like. Here's, my influences, all of that. Do you like it? Great. Give me a follow. If you don't, great. Don't worry about it.
Welcome to the Surf Strong Show, conversations for a healthy community. I'm your host, Greg Finch. I'd like to remind you to like, comment, subscribe to this and all of our episodes of the Surf Strong Show wherever you get your podcasts. For all show notes and links that we talk about in the episodes, videos of the podcast, you can go to surfstrongfit.com/podcast for this and all the past episodes. Thanks for joining us. It really means a lot. Today we welcome Pepa Ivanoff onto the Surf Strong Show. She's an Australian-born, Central America-based artist, surfer, and traveler. She has over 20 years of international experience creating digital and analog art. Her art is both inspired by and a result of her nomadic surfer lifestyle. She's chosen a life less ordinary in the pursuit of creative passion and wants to inspire others to create a life that is a work of art. She's painted over 300 murals in 8 countries, loves to combine traditional and analog art with digital techniques. We have a really fun conversation about her early days growing up in Australia, moving to California to pursue her graphic arts career, the decision to move to Costa Rica full-time, and how that allowed her to become the mural artist she is today, how she stays grounded and in good, positive habits with the amount of travel and moving that she does. Let's get to our conversation with Pepa Ivanoff. Hi, Pepa. Welcome to the Surf Strong Show. I really appreciate you taking the time to be part of the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So first let's start. We'll get into all the details of your moving and your art and your creative, but tell me where you are right now.
Right now, I am in Bocas del Toro on the Caribbean side of Panama.
Oh, nice. Now, Bocas del Toro, is it an island off of Panama or is it part of the mainland? I forget.
It's actually a whole series, like an archipelago of islands here. I don't know exactly how many there are, but there's quite a lot. The one that I'm living on right now is La Cadenero. It's only accessible by boat, and there's no cars on the island. So it's pretty awesome.
Oh, wow. And you'll be there for a certain stretch, for a longer stretch of time, and
yeah, as of now, I got here in November. I came here with the intention just to spend a surf season here because I haven't surfed in the Caribbean really, and also to do some work. So I got here in November, and I'm going to stay until the end of April.
Nice. Now, do you leave the island at all, or have you been on there since November?
No, I've moved around, actually. I've been on a couple of different islands. When I came in November, I went straight to work on a project on Isla Solarte. So I stayed there for the first couple of weeks. Then I was here on Caranero. Then I went to the main island, Isla Colón, and worked there for a little while. And then I've been back here on Caranero, but I've also spent some time on Batimientos. So I'm kind of just doing the island hopping thing, living the Bocas life.
Yeah. Now, what is that, like a boat taxi situation, or people that you've gotten to know, the kind of thing moving around?
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of both. So to get around, it's super easy here. Like there's just all these little lanchas in Spanish, like it's just like a little, in Australia we'd call it like a little tinny, like a small boat with an outboard motor, and the guys just kind of like zoom back and forth, and you just kind of stand on your dock and wave, and they'll come pick you up. For me to get into town, it's like $1. I just stand there on my dock and wave, have $1 in my hand, ready to go. Just go to the main island. If I want to go surf, it's a couple bucks, depending on where I want to go. Or I've also made a lot of friends here now that have their own boats. So if I'm lucky enough, they'll pick me up along the way, and I'll hitch a ride to go surf with them. But it's really, really cool to live somewhere where you don't need a car, and it's just I don't know. I think part of the reason that Bocas is so charming to me is just, being able to go everywhere by boat, because everything you do just feels like a little adventure. Like even if you're just going into town to, grab groceries or whatever, it's just such a cool thing to just jump on a little boat. And then sometimes I'll have to stop and pick someone else up, and then they'll stop and go somewhere else. So it just becomes this little like adventure wherever you go. It's a lot of fun living here.
Yeah, forced not to be in a hurry. Like, oh, I might have to go over there for a little bit. That's fine. Everything's fine. Just we're on this adventure together.
I mean, I've been in Central America for 12 years. I'm pretty used to the concept of mañana. Mañana doesn't mean tomorrow, it just means not right now. So Bocas definitely embraces the mañana vibe. And yeah, I love it. It affects like all kind of like all aspects of the life here as well. Everything's very, very laid back. No one's in a hurry to do anything. It's very, very relaxed. I like it a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were born in Australia. What part of Australia were you born in?
Mm-hmm. I'm from the Gold Coast. So, yeah, I was born in the Southport Hospital, which doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, I was born and raised there. I lived on the Gold Coast until I was 23. And it was an amazing time to grow up. I mean, I was born in 81, so I kind of grew up in like, you know, the late 80s and the 90s on the Goldie. And it was just, it's changed a lot now, I'm sure. But back in the day, it was just such a magical place to grow up. It was, I mean, it still is, but it was, yeah, a really special time of my life. And I feel very, very fortunate that now that I get to travel to a lot of different places, that's where I started out.
Yeah, isn't that such a key part of it, right? Like I'm on the central coast of California and grew up in California, but Southern California, more city, a little bit more open space here, and we love it here. This is home now, and I think about that. Like our daughter's 15, and we travel with her a lot, partly because that's what we care about, but also for that same reason. Like you can't know what you have unless you have something to compare it to, the goods and the bads, and I see that in people a lot. In like this place in particular, you can tell the people that have left or travel and come back, and you can tell the people that are a little bit more, this is what they know, this is their reality, and just different things of points of view. And that's such a key part of travel, right? Is just perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a question that interests me a lot, like about that subject as well. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, what's better, like this place or that place?" I'm like, it's not really anything to do with being better. It's just different. Like you can't answer that question. It's like comparing apples to oranges. Like there's very, very different parts about each place that you go. There's a lot of similarities too. But in general, you can't say one place is better than the other because it's, you know, also that's my opinion on what's better is not, it's going to be your opinion on what's better either. So I don't know. I just try to enjoy each place for what it is, you know, take the positive experiences with everything that goes along with, you know, living and traveling and being in a place, and just try not to compare anything. Just try to, you know, appreciate and enjoy it for what it is, like in that moment.
Yeah, and that's a philosophy that you can put in almost any part of life, and it's, I think it's like a human nature to want to compartmentalize. So that question really is like, well, what's better? Like, how should that influence my choices of what I do? And you can do that in any part of life. Like, is it better to pursue this thing, or is it better to pursue, as opposed to being present, which is a big theme on this podcast? How do we keep that presence, just to have just to be able to experience what it is, because we bring our own baggage, of course, our own biases, and how to let that go and just be in that place without a preconceived notion of what you're going to experience, or what is good and what is bad, and what does that really mean. It's almost the essence of the question that they're asking, like good and bad is so arbitrary anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So growing up on the Gold Coast, did you start surfing at a really young age? What was that kind of experience as you started coming into surfing?
I didn't. I started surfing when I was 19, which by today's standards is really late. Like I see little groms, like so small, like ripping now, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Like to see little kids just be fearless, and it's like always double, triple overhead for them, and they're just charging it. It's so cool. But no, I didn't start surfing until later. I always lived at the beach. I always went to the beach. Obviously, being, you know, from the Gold Coast in Australia, like it's just part of life. Like the beach is just there. You always go. I always swam. I boogie boarded when I was little. I love body surfing, but I didn't actually get the surfing bug until 19. And then once I got that, it just never went away, and it's not showing any signs of going away. It's actually getting like more and more. The older I get and the more I get into surfing, it like dictates pretty much the majority of the decisions I make in my life. So yeah, no complaints.
Yeah, I have that same feeling. Do you ever find, now you travel for work, which we're going to get into, and so you're going to destinations that generally are going to have surf around, but when you make a choice for some personal travel that's not necessarily business related, do you ever find yourself saying, okay, I'm not going to this area because there will be surf? Because this is like, for my experience, there's times where like it's so part of who you are. If I'm going to an area that surf is an option, I'm going to be looking what the swell's doing, what the tide's doing, what's the wind doing, like, okay, and my wife knows, we've been together so long, she'll know, like, whatever the plans are, if a swell comes and everything lines up, like, that's what I'm going to go do. And so I'll find sometimes, like, if we're going on a trip, I'll be like, okay, let's go to this lake or this place with some friends, and I find myself in a certain kind of relaxed state that I don't always get when I'm a place where they're surfing, because surfing is just like, I'm not gonna miss it, like, what's going on. And I find sometimes I really appreciate, like, okay, that's off the table, like, what are we doing today? I don't have any details that I had to figure out.
Yeah, you don't have that distraction.
Yeah. Do you ever travel that
Yeah.
surf isn't part of it, or do you just, like, it's pretty much most of the places you're going is surf centered?
I mean, most of the places I go, there is the option to surf, but I do travel to not surf. I don't ever specifically go on surf trips because I feel like I don't need to. But I'm trying to be more mindful as well, especially this year. I've got some trips planned and some destinations coming up where surf isn't even on the table. And as I'm getting older and as my career's, kind of shifting gears and I'm in a different place in my life, I also want to start exploring places that are not surf destinations. I want to go, I want to travel, I want to experience the culture, I want to meet people, I want to have all of those experiences. And if there's waves, awesome. Like, that for me will be like the cherry on the top. But it's not going to be like if there's no waves, it's not the be all and like, oh, I'm not going. It's actually for me like more interesting, especially if it's not a surf destination. And imagine that, like, you go somewhere with no intention to surf, but then you get there and there are waves and you meet someone that's a surfer and you get to go on this experience and surf a place that no one really knows about, where no one's out, there's no surfers, there's no surf camps, there's no surf shops, there's no anything, and you just go and have this awesome experience that you weren't even planning. So that's kind of more the vibe that I'm looking for. If that answers your question.
Yeah, that kind of unexpected experience, of course, that really is such a core part of the essence of travel, right? Like, whenever we do something and we plan a trip, it's always kind of a loose framework. Like, okay, we do want to see this and we want to see this, but in between it's just open, because you'll turn a corner and you'll see just this perfect little cafe or something, just something about the light or the time of day or something. You sit down and then that unexpected can happen, or you stumble upon something, and sometimes those are the most vivid memories you have. And you have to give space for that, otherwise you're just following a schedule like you do at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just said is like a really nice metaphor for life too. I feel like if you are so meticulously planning every single thing that you're doing, where you're going, and what's on the agenda, you're going to miss out on those little moments in life that just pop up unexpectedly. And I feel like even in recent memory, all of the most like fun, amazing, memorable moments that haven't been planned. They've just come up because I was in the right place at the right time. A friend I met along the way had a perfect idea. We're like, yeah, let's go do it. Like, it just wasn't something that was planned. It just happened in the moment. And I feel like, if you are too meticulous and you try to be by the book, you miss out on those moments. And I don't want to miss out on those. I want to encourage more of those to happen, because that's where the magic is.
Yeah. And I think people do that for numerous reasons. And probably one of the main ones is to retain a sense of control, right? Like, I'm in control of these things, which of course we really aren't. And so less adaptable, not being able to adapt to that, just raises the stress, raises the amount of energy you're putting into something, as opposed to just letting it kind of happen and adapting to it. We all have our level, And it's just reminding ourselves of that. Like, we're not in control. So just what are you doing right now? Like, adapt to what you're doing. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I read a really cool story about you in another interview. One of your earliest memories was sitting with your parents' vinyl record collection and staring at the art. Outstanding early
Yeah.
memory, by the way. I love that. Do you remember any of the specific albums or the art that was on them?
There's two that are like burned into my memory. The first one is a Rolling Stones album called, I think it's called Some Girls. And the cover, it was like, it looks like very Andy Warhol pop art. It was like,
Yeah.
and the faces of the women had been cut out, I believe. And I just, at the time, it was just such an interesting concept, and the color palette. And now that I look at my like stencil art that I make, my very graphic like eye towards art in general, I feel like that album cover like really influenced a lot of that. And I've also always loved Andy Warhol. I mean, at the time I probably didn't connect the two dots, but I don't know which came first, but there's definitely those two influences are playing off of each other with that. So that's the first one. And then there's another one which is kind of random, but it was called The War of the Worlds. And I don't think it was music. I think it might have been the soundtrack to something, but it had this, it was something about like aliens had come to Earth and were taking over the world. But the illustrations, the graphic detail of these illustrations to me was just fascinating. Like they almost looked like photographs. Like that's how detailed and amazing they were. And you kind of leafed through this booklet and it told a story. So those are the two that really jumped to mind. And I know, like now that I'm verbalizing it, the artwork in both of those has really influenced the art that I create now as an adult.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing how just those are like it just hits somewhere and then you keep kind of pulling back from it a little bit, you know? That's great.
But that was always something that I loved about. I mean, I love music. I've always loved music. And obviously, with my parents having a massive vinyl collection as a kid, like music was always something that was around. And I just remember always appreciating album art, you know, whether, you know, went from records, then to tapes, then to CDs. You know, one of the CDs that I remember the most, the artwork for was Tool from the 90s, album Enema. It had this eye that had this like holographic crazy thing, and the CD cover itself had like grooves in it. Like I feel like artists, like musicians back in the day, put so much time and effort into creating obviously not just the music of their album, but their art and the way it was portrayed. And then I also remember like band t-shirts when they went on tour, like tour posters. There was just a very graphic artistic element around musicians. And as someone that's always loved music and so obviously still do, it's always been a huge part of my life. I feel like that combination, like starting with the records and then like seeing the creative process artistically behind putting the records together in, you know, that way, whether it was the record, tape, CD, as it's progressed, that was a huge influence to me. And it's interesting now, you know, obviously having digital, everything is very convenient, but a lot of that's gone away.
Yeah.
And kids today, oh my God, I just said that. Oh my God, I'm 32 and I said that. Kids today don't have that, you know, and it's kind of like trips me out. Like maybe they do, I don't know. Maybe if their parents are like vintage or hipsters or whatever, they've got that. But it's like in general, when you download a song, you don't get that artistic, creative packaging that, you know, we were exposed to. So
yeah, you don't. That there is a disconnect between those things. The creation of the art and the packaging of that. Also, the other part, almost as an extension of that same idea, is the musician's creative process for putting together an experience. Like these songs flow into the next song, into this, and now a lot of people are just listening to individual songs, and so they're losing that kind of experience of sitting down with something and just letting that music and experience flow through. It is, I still have a lot of records too, and I do that. I'll consciously stop and say, okay, like, oh, I love this song, and of course I'm listening to digital music. I have it on my, you know, phones, and I'm going places and stuff. But like, I'll stop and I'll go, okay, I want to hear, you know, side A of this album, and sit down and listen to that whole side, and then physically flipping that over. And And really, vinyl was before I was born in '74. It still was existing, but it wasn't around in the way that I was as I came into the consciousness of my own musical pursuit. So it really is almost like I'm experiencing something that I didn't have as a kid, but there's something tangible about that you do kind of lose in the digital space. There's a little bit of a sadness to that, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just nostalgia, right? Like it's just
Yeah, yeah,
things have changed so much, and they continue to
yeah,
change. And change is good. I mean, the only constant is change.
yeah,
But it's just interesting for me, like now, like having this conversation to realize, wow, that was a huge part of me as a creative person, and like
yeah.
creatives now aren't having that experience. Like, what the question you just asked me, like, what would one of their earliest memories that was around creation and artistic pursuits and things like that, what would their influence be today? it's um
Right.
it's
That's
interesting
a
to think
really that would
about.
it would be a
Yeah.
really interesting question, like what they would
Yeah.
if they
Yeah.
could differentiate even, because that's one thing about the
Hmm.
digital space and technology is it's ubiquitous in so many ways, and it flows, so there's not a constant state to it. I think that's part of the
Hmm.
attraction of the vinyl is maybe some nostalgia, but also something being tactile, something being tangible that you're actually holding. This is a piece of art that was created. The art that's on top, the liner
Hmm.
notes, like all of this, it's pulling you into the music more. And I find myself seeking out tangible things. I think that's a big part
Hmm.
of what surfing, of course, does for us is presence, and it's this all of that has to go
Hmm.
away, and you're physically in this place, and it is tactile, and all of the
Hmm.
experience of that is wrapped up together in that, and it's a memory that you're going to pull, just like looking at the record early on. It's a memory that you can hold, that's a very specific time. And something about the digital space, it it it, it just kind of flows so much that it doesn't have defined places sometimes, and I think that doesn't feel great all the time.
Hmm. No, to your point, I feel like I personally prefer to read books, like physical books. I don't have a Kindle. I feel like I spend enough of my time like on my computer and on my phone doing digital things that I actually like to break away from the digital and pull out a book. I also like, I like holding a book in my hands. I've got a book that I read every day that I've had for more than 10 years, and it's like falling apart. Like the edges are dog-eared, it's all soft, like some of the pages are so worn you can't really read it. But there's also something about that as well. It's Yeah, again, maybe it's nostalgic, I don't know, but I'm the same way. When magazines were a thing, my first job out of design school was actually in a publishing it was a surfing magazine in a publishing house. And like I was always fascinated by magazines as well. Like print was always a huge, it has, it's where I started out, so it's affected, and influenced me as an artist. Like, yeah, print media, books and magazines were a huge influence to me. And you still see magazines every once in a while, and you still see people with books, which is awesome. But again, it's just like that convenience. It's like, oh, I can download 15 books onto my Kindle, and that's way more convenient than putting 15 books in your backpack and like traveling with it. So it's like again, it's like nothing's better or worse. It's not really a comparison. It just, they just are what they are.
No, real books are better. I couldn't agree with you more. Real books holding my head are definitely better. I mean, I do
Real
download, like
book.
when I went on my last trip, I definitely had books on my iPad to have it for, because I couldn't take those many books. But when I'm home here, it's
Yeah.
absolutely a book in my hand. So you talked about
Hmm.
your first job in California. Talk Before we get into that and some of your early career. Talk about your decision
Uh-huh.
to leave Australia to move to California. I think you said did you say you were 23 when you did that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I started my like studied graphic design in Australia, and I started my career in Australia. So my first job, the publishing job that I just spoke of, was for Australia's Surfing Life magazine.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
it was on the Gold Coast in
Hmm.
Australia, and that's where I started working after I graduated from design school. So I stayed and worked in Australia until I was 23, and then at the time in Australia, I was working for a little company that had their head office in San Diego, California, And I went out there a couple times for like Surf Expo and like those things back in the day when that was a thing, ASR and all the trade shows, and to go to meetings and so forth. And then that company got bought out by a bigger company in the States and they expanded. And they asked me, did I want to move to California and work out of the head office? And as someone that had always wanted to travel my entire life, I jumped at the chance. California was never like on my, again, this is also kind of being open to life and where experiences led you. Like I knew I always wanted to travel. I knew I always wanted to like leave Australia and go live and work somewhere else. But California was not like written down as my destination. Like, oh, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to get to California. It just came up. And so I followed that path. And again, this was a long time ago. But at the time, it was amazing. It wasn't a huge transition, obviously, leaving Australia, going there. I didn't have to learn a new language. You know, everything felt pretty familiar. I'd already been there a few times, so I had a little community of friends. I lived in a really cool neighborhood in northern San Diego called Lucadia, like right by the beach. It was a really, really awesome time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So again, it wasn't planned, but it was just one of those serendipitous things in life where the road led me there. And I ended up staying for 8 years. I thought I was going to stay for 1 or 2. But yeah, stayed for a lot longer.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how those things happen, of course, right? You make a plan, you think, oh, I'm going to do this. Mm-hmm. Was your plan, you thought, oh, I'd be here 1 or 2 years, and then you thought you'd go back to Australia? Mm-hmm. Or did you really even have, like, this is an experience and then I'll go home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was kind of both. I always just figured eventually I'd go back to Australia. I was just going to do this for a little while and just kind of, see how I liked it. But I didn't ever expect to stay there for as long as I did. But me staying there for as long as I did allowed me to meet the people that I met that owned the house in Costa Rica where I lived. So that was my next transition. Like after 8 years in California, I segued to Costa Rica, and that's where I've been living for the last 12 years. Wow. So I left Australia. I haven't lived in Australia for 20 years. Wow. It's been a long time.
Now when you moved to Costa Rica, that was you ended your job, your current job in the graphic industry. What was that decision-making process like for you? Because this is really this space, right, for a lot of people. Like, we see people traveling for work or whatever their image is of their ideal is, but to take that leap, if you will, that transition from leaving something behind and moving to a new opportunity, that's where most people get stuck, of course. It's some fear of the unknown, of change. What was that process like for you?
So I didn't completely stop my work as a graphic designer. I just transitioned into more of an off-site freelancer. And this was 12 years ago. I was kind of doing the digital nomad thing before anyone was a digital nomad. And there was a lot of resistance. I lost a few clients. I had clients beg me to stay, offered me all kinds of, incentives to stay. But I was at a point in my life where I just knew that I wanted to simplify things. I didn't want to be part of the rat race. And I knew I wanted to transition from being like full-time digital artist to pursuing more my analog art. This is one thing that, like, I love graphic design. I love creating digitally. But no one really, in school and, when you're starting out, no one really prepares you for the fact that you're going to be sitting in an office. You're going to be commuting to and from work. You're going to be sitting in a windowless box for 8+ hours a day, going to meetings and everything else that's involved being around a ton of people. Like, I'm an introvert. I don't like being around a lot of people. It makes me feel, I have a very, very small social battery. And when it's up, I just don't function well. So there's a lot of things about working in an office that I find are very, very archaic, and it's not for everybody. And I knew that from a young age, but I just couldn't figure out. And when I say young age, like early in my career, I knew I wasn't cut out for it. I wasn't cut out for the corporate ladder. I wasn't cut out for any of that stuff. But I really liked what I did. I was good at it. And I kind of couldn't figure out. I didn't see the way forward yet, but I knew it wasn't something that I wanted to be doing like for the rest of my life. So I started dialing it back. The last 2 years I lived in California and started being more like full-time freelance and was only going into the office 2 days a week and working the rest of the time from home. And then when the opportunity came up to go to Costa Rica, I was like, well, this is perfect. I can do what I'm doing from anywhere, and I'm just going to tell my clients that I'm not going to come in very frequently. And yeah, as I said, some of them had resistance, some of them were more open to it. But when I first went to Costa Rica, for the first couple of years, I was still going back to California every couple of months and checking in the office, going to meetings, doing the FaceTime, doing all that kind of thing. So it wasn't as if I just cut it one day. I was like, that's it, it's over. It was a slow transition for me, but the transition was coming for a while. And I just knew early on that I just wasn't going to thrive in that corporate office environment. Just not for me.
Yeah, knowing those things that won't work just helps so much to define what your steps could be to get to a new place. You might not know exactly what those steps are or really where that destination is leading you, but it's not this. And that's a really important part of that, is just and it isn't so interesting that looking back on that time, it was so obviously before COVID and before all of the, even leading up to that, being more open to those things. And now the culture obviously has shifted so much to a place where so many people experience that idea of like, I don't have to be in this box. It's not necessary to be in this box nearly as much as you want me to be. I can get all of these things done and more, and still we can still get to the same goals that we need to get to. So how would you say like that kind of early graphic design, both your education and your early career, has that influenced what we're going to talk about, all the mural work that you do and the amazing art that you create with that? How's that influenced what you're doing now in this new medium and this large scale?
Well, the reason I studied graphic design to begin with is because I always wanted to be an artist, but I was always told by, teachers, parents, family, peers, everybody, that art isn't a real job. Oh, you can't be an artist. That can be your hobby, but that's not a job. Oh, you're going to be a starving artist. You can't make money as an artist, whatever. So I thought to myself, okay, what's the most art-like form of a job? And so I thought, graphic design. So I always kept art on the side as a hobby, but graphic design was like my job. And it's interesting because not all graphic designers are artists, and not all artists are graphic designers. So I feel like I have a very unique perspective in that I can do both, and I draw, the best of both worlds, I guess, to create what I create. You can look at my art and you can tell that I'm a graphic designer, I think. Like a lot of people can see that in my work. You can tell that I specialized in prints, like repeating prints with tropical patterns and prints. I used to design board shorts and bikinis and things like that in the surf industry. And you can kind of look at my work now as an artist and see how that has influenced what I'm doing now. So there's a lot of crossover for sure. But it's just interesting how I went from art was the thing I wanted to do, but it became a hobby, to now it's what I'm doing. And like the steps that I've taken along the way to get where it is. And don't get me wrong, I love creating digitally. I still take on graphic design projects every once in a while. I still spend, all of my mural planning. There's a lot of like digital aspects behind that, like scaling work up to size, measurements. What I always do when I'm meeting with going through the process with the client is I take a photo of the wall as it is in the space, and then I superimpose my art, my mural over the top as a proposal so they can see. That's something where I'm using the digital aspect of what I do to present like something that I'm then going to create as an analog artist. So there's a lot of ways that they're very complementary. And I feel very fortunate that I specialized in the digital one for as long as I did, because it's now making me, I think, more, it makes my work more professional, like more palatable for people. Like it's one thing for an artist to walk in and be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to paint some leaves on your wall. Like, do you trust me? Whereas I can come in and be like, okay, here's exactly what I'm going to do. Here's the color palette. Here's how it's going to look. Here's how long it's going to take. This is it. It just gives an extra, it gives an extra, I don't know, people, I guess, are more inclined to trust me, and see that I know what I'm doing. I know how to put it together. I know how to execute it, rather than me just being like, hey, all right, I'm just going to do this, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like he's more credibility. Maybe is that the
Yeah.
word I'm looking for? I'm not.
Just they're
Yeah.
just reassured. Maybe they're not a
Yeah.
creative person. Maybe they don't have that background, and
Mm-hmm.
yet they can see maybe it's a business setting, and there's other people in the decision making
Mm-hmm.
process, as opposed to somebody's private home.
Yeah.
Let's say that says, "I want something beautiful here. I know your work. Make something beautiful for me." As opposed to like
Mm-hmm.
holding
Mm-hmm.
this thing and saying, "Oh, yes, I can visualize that now." And I can show this to
Mm-hmm.
somebody and they can go, "Oh, that looks great. Let's do that." And so yeah, it's a skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's a skill that you have to be able to show somebody that maybe doesn't have that same creative process that others do. So
Mm-hmm.
how did you
And
first
also,
get involved in doing the murals professionally, or even just starting to transition into that medium?
hmm well, I was always painting, always as a hobby. And then when I went to Costa Rica and I had more free time, I was just painting more and more. I was painting like small scale pieces, like small canvases. One of my favorite things was like wooden boxes that I would have someone would make for me, and then I would paint on them and have like little art shows and sell them. And then I really got into painting surfboards. So
Oh
I was
yeah.
painting surfboards in a board factory in Tamarindo, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. So it just taught me. I learned a lot of new techniques painting boards, because obviously painting on foam and then painting on a glass board are two very different things. I used the airbrush. It was a really, really awesome experience for me, and I cherish it a lot. So while I was working there painting the boards, one of the shapers, he was from Barcelona. A good friend of his came to visit the factory one day, and she saw my work. She was an interior designer for this new hostel company called Selena that was branching into Central America. They opened a couple locations in Panama, and they were, going to go more for like Costa Rica and some other locations. She saw my work. She's like, "Hey, have you ever painted murals?" I say, "Well, I've painted a few walls here and there, and whatever, but I've never really like done it like professionally." She's like, "Well, I really like your style. I love your work. Would you like to come and work with me?" And I said, "Yes, of course. That sounds awesome." And she was great. She was a good friend of my friend. When you just meet somebody and you just click
Hmm.
with them instantly. She's
Yeah.
like one of my best friends, and somebody that I love and appreciate so much. But in that moment, I didn't know any of this. She was just someone I'd met. She's like, "Okay, well, our first project here is going to be in La Fortuna, which is in a beautiful part of Costa Rica. It's the base of the Arenal volcano. It's really amazing." She's like, "We've got a property there. We're renovating it, and I want you to come and paint." So I was like, "That sounds awesome." But then, as I was driving there, I'll never forget this. It's a gorgeous drive from where I live, from the beach up there. It's about 2.5 hours, and you kind of go up through these mountains, and the landscape changes, and it just becomes really tropical and lush, and there's waterfalls, and it's like rains a lot more there. It's like this beautiful drive through this winding road. And I remember like my car was packed up with all my art stuff, all my stencils, all my paints, everything. And I just remember my little like imposter syndrome on my shoulder was like, "What do you think you're doing? Like, who do you think you are? You're going to mess this up. You've never done this before. You don't know how to paint murals." Nah, 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 nah. And I feel like all creative people struggle. I feel like maybe all people struggle with imposter syndrome every once in a while, but I feel like as creatives, especially if you're kind of young and starting out with something new, there's this like, it was just there telling me like, eh. But then I got there and I got to the location and I started meeting all of these people and had this amazing project with all of these walls to paint in. I pretty much had creative freedom with it too. Like Ingrid was her name. She gave me like some direction on the style of the art that she wanted, and the way she was going to stage the rooms as the interior designer. But I had a lot of flexibility and freedom. So for me to be there amongst all these other creative people from all over the world, building out these hostels, and Selena kind of really changed the hostel game. This was like 7 years ago too. So before that, hostels had this kind of like scummy, grungy, like, "Ooh, you're going to stay in a hostel? Like you're going to get like some weird, I don't know, bed bugs or something." Like they
You're gonna
really
get
changed the
robbed.
game. Like yeah, totally. They really like stepped up like that level of travel. And so to be part of that company, like in its like kind of early stages, and be collaborating with these incredibly talented people, just making art and being in beautiful locations, for me, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is incredible. And so after that first project, it just kind of snowballed. Selena just kind of blew up. I did 14 projects with them in 4 countries in Central America. And that's really how once the ball started rolling, it didn't stop. So it went from me going to these other locations. The next location I went to was Granada, Nicaragua. And then after that, I went to San Jose, Costa Rica. And then I did another couple in Costa Rica. And it kind of became a point where murals were kind of becoming a thing then as well. People were seeing the value that having some amazing art would bring to their location, to their space, whether it was a restaurant, bar, hotel, wherever. And so they'd see my work while I was at the Selena, and they'd be like, "Oh, hey, I have a bar down the street. Would you be interested in painting for me? Or hey, my brother has a place here. Are you going to go there anytime?" So the work just started finding me. It was incredible. Like in the beginning, I didn't really have to, and I still to this day, I feel really grateful that I didn't have to chase anything. It just kind of all flowed naturally. And for me, that's like a huge thing I try to be really mindful of in life, is just to let things flow. Like if you're trying to force an outcome or like force something to happen, I think that's a pretty good sign that it wasn't meant to be. Maybe not ever, but just especially not in that moment. But if your things are flowing and you're meeting people and you're getting work and it feels good and you're following this path, like that's how it needs to be. And that's, working in the surfboard factory, meeting Alex, who introduced me to Ingrid, that opened up my world to exactly what I wanted to be doing, to exactly what I'm doing now. But before I met them, I couldn't have articulated that. I always knew that's what I wanted to do, but I just didn't know what that was. And now that I'm here, like I don't want to be doing anything else.
Yeah, there's a couple interesting.
That's probably a very long-winded.
No, that's the beauty of the podcast. It can be as long as we want it to be. One of the things that's interesting about that, well, there's a couple things is the repetitions that you're able to have, that you got in the surfboard factory, and then that first early experience with Selena, is you're getting so many reps in. Your skill set within that new medium and that new scale, you're getting those repetitions under and having that, and of course then building your confidence. And I think underlying all of those things too, like you're talking about letting it flow, one of the keys for that, which I see across multiple people, is allowing yourself to be open to something takes a few things. It takes some preparation. One, mentally you have to be open to it. Like you said, if you're forcing down this one path, you're only looking down that path, and you might be missing opportunities off to the side. And two, allowing the structure of your life to be able to take advantage of an opportunity, whether that's being in debt or taking on things that are going to occupy your time and financially, and give you that feeling of being locked into something. You'll maybe be presented with an opportunity, or it's a step or two removed from you, and you're like, oh, I can't do that because I have this commitment or I have this responsibility. And so we all have responsibilities in our life, but how you choose those to make some decisions, each decision might open up an opportunity to you, or it might restrict that opportunity because you're not allowing yourself to see it. So you made those decisions to push through some of those resistance of, or someone's offering you this opportunity to stay put with where you are. You took that leap to go forward, to say what might become of this. And that just takes a lot of confidence. It takes a lot of being open to the change. And that's how you've created those opportunities. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and like going back to what you said about the repetition as well, I believe like just having those, like having a client like Selena with like so many walls to paint per project, especially as someone starting out in the beginning, I got over my imposter syndrome real quick because I had to. It was like, I can't be sitting there being like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. There's like 15 walls per project, sometimes 20, sometimes 50, depending on the size of it. If it's, there's multiple dorms, there's multiple private rooms, there's a reception, there's a bar, there's a restaurant, there's the entrance, there's like every part of that place, they wanted art on it, which was so fantastic in the beginning is they really, really wanted to see people be creative. So I had to just get in there and just go for it. And that's why, like, now I'm almost 7 years into doing this full time, 6.5. I've, in that small amount of time, I've managed to paint, I've just hit 300 murals in 8 countries. And
Whoa.
it's because I just had like so much to do, especially in the beginning, that yeah, I was able to get that repetition, do it over and over, that I could walk into a place, I could look at the wall, I could figure out what the size was, I could look around at the finishings, I knew everybody there, I knew their taste level, I knew what everything was going to look like, I knew, like, it just became like clockwork. It became not easy, but it became predictable, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And that's really helped me now with where I'm at, is that I have all of that experience that I learned like early on, that I've now been able to bring to, different levels of clients in different parts of the world, which, having that start, I'm just so, so grateful for. But again, I didn't plan it. It just happened. And it's like amazing that it's exactly what I want to be doing.
Yeah, and it's again, you're open to it. Like that's really it's just such an essential part of that. It's just you're open to, oh, I meet this person, and you're again back to presence and seeing that and connecting with somebody. And it is you touched on it earlier. It is so rare to meet somebody, and you can feel this, like, I'm just comfortable with this person. I don't really know them. And, that doesn't always prolong out to a lifelong friendship. But a lot of times when you have that, especially later in life, like we're both in our 40s, like that doesn't happen that often because we're just all so full of busy. And, busy is a terrible word. It's really just an excuse for, not being present. But you have to step back, and we don't get that many opportunities to really stop and talk to somebody for an extended period of time. I think that's partly why I love doing these so much. Like these are uninterrupted conversations. A lot of time with people that I haven't met before. Like we had some exchange, but we didn't really have any. We didn't know each other, and you're able to sit down and just have this conversation. And I find like that's a big part of why I love it so much, because you reflect and you go, oh yeah, that's pretty rare in life now. Like even like you said, socially, if you're at a party, I just went to a party with a bunch of friends a couple weeks ago, and I realized at the end I had a great time, but I talked to everybody maybe for 2 minutes, because you're like 2 minutes, and then somebody else is over here, and then and having just that uninterrupted conversation with somebody. So it's that connection with people that we seek, and again, wrapping it back to opportunity, that's really what it comes down to is connecting with people, and then seeing what you can create. And I think you've mentioned on here and talked about the Selena experiences, creating what you do as a collaboration. That's a big part of what you strive for.
Yeah, absolutely. As an artist, like that's one of my favorite words. And that's one of the things that I really, really love about the projects that I work on, is that I get to work. Obviously, artists, we're very individual. My work is my work. It's, a reflection of who I am. But if I can collaborate and share with a group of people, with a talented architect, a talented interior designer, another artist that's perhaps working in wood, like there's so many creative people in the process of construction, of building homes, restaurants, hotels, things of that nature. There's so many creative people that are, I'm going to meet and work with along the way. It's been really, for me as a creative person, it's been such a joy to collaborate with them, because they see things from a different perspective. An architect's eye on a piece of art is going to be very different to an artist's eye on a piece of art. And sometimes they'll say something, just the way the light hits something, or just their fresh perspective, you'll be like, I never thought of it like that. And then it just kind of puts you in a different direction. And then the same for them. Sometimes they'll get stuck on something, and we'll share ideas, or we'll talk about things, and I'll be like, oh, wow, like that's actually an awesome idea. Or I'll go to the workshop and I'll see the guys making some amazing stuff out of wood or metal, and just the way they're painting and the finishes they're using. It's just like, that's really cool. Like it's just having that collaborative piece where you can share with other creative people. It's for me, it's like that's what it's all about. And I think like collaboration, like not competition. Like I don't want to compete with anybody in anything ever. Like, I want to share. I want to see everyone win. I want to see everyone doing their best and making beautiful, wonderful things. And if we can do that like together as a team, it's like so amazing. Like, especially at the end of a project, to see like what started as like, you know, a demolished building or like a shell, to walk through like a finished place with like beautiful finishings, beautiful furniture, amazing artwork, happy clients, music playing. You're just like, wow, like we made this. And
Yeah.
it's really, really special experience. I love
Yeah.
it. And
And
I just feel
having
so
the,
fortunate that everywhere I
yeah.
do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's that it's immersed in, again, back to the tangible. Like you walk through, like this is
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a
Yeah.
creative pursuit, but this is where I can connect on it. Is we're remodeling our kitchen right now, and I'm doing a lot of the work,
Mm-hmm.
and I like it because it's so
Mm-hmm.
opposite from what I do with clients and the podcast. It's it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it is it's
Mm-hmm.
tangible. I'm building something, and then to look, and then for like your experience, you're walking through this space that you've created with these other craftsmen and women, and looking and going, also to projecting out like how many amazing experiences people are going to have that for the years and decades
Mm-hmm.
ahead, like all of these
Yeah.
times together and memories made. You're creating this space for community and experience, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
a wonderful way for art to live and interact.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things that brings you the most joy is like seeing my art in a public space and seeing people like genuinely enjoying it. Like, for me, that just brings me so much joy. That obviously I love what I do, it makes me happy, but to see that it's making other people happy, it's like, wow, that's what it's all about. And just all the time, like, I see beautiful photos of people that have visited places that I've worked and painted, and like with big smiles in front of the work and just so happy. And I get so many lovely messages from people like, oh wow, it's so nice. Like, it's very rewarding. I mean, not that I do it for validation from anybody else, but it's just so, it's just lovely to see that you can bring happiness and joy to somebody else's life with something that's already bringing you happiness and joy. You know, it's like a win-win.
Yeah.
And for me, I want to be a net positive person. I want all the interactions that I have to be a win-win, a positive, like a positive outcome for everybody. And I feel like creating artists, we have a very unique opportunity to do that. Because it's obviously it's an expression of who we are, but if we put it out there and we share it and other people love it too, I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, it's bringing that circle back around to you. Like you said, it's not for validation,
Mm-hmm.
it's for a shared experience. You
Mm-hmm.
created
Yeah.
this piece of art that is then circling back around to you. And one thing I just kind of thought of that's also an interesting dynamic to what you do, separate from a lot of other artists, is when you are creating your art, the commerce of that has already been handled, right? This is something that's over here, it's
Mm-hmm.
already been done. And now I'm going on this artistic creative experience to create this thing. And when I'm done,
Yeah.
it just lives here. And that's probably a wonderful
Mm-hmm.
feeling, as opposed to which some artist friends I have, it's like I'm creating this thing and now I have to go to a show and sell it or do this. And it's just not
Mm-hmm.
always a great experience. But that part of it is already
Mm-hmm.
handled. That's an interesting dynamic for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I 100% agree, because I do. But I mean, it's been a minute since I've actually sat down and just created art for myself and had a show. It's something that I'm planning to do this year. Actually, in the next couple of months, I want to take more time out to focus on that. But it is, and again, it comes back to that imposter syndrome too. It's like you put a lot of pressure on yourself as an artist too. If you lock yourself away in your little artist cave and you work on a collection and you have the show and you go and you're like, oh my God, is anyone going to like it? Is anyone going to buy it? Like, that's the other thing, is like putting a money value, a dollar value on your art is something that a lot of artists struggle with. And this comes back
Yeah.
to me having the experience as a digital artist, working as a graphic designer, working in very, very corporate settings for huge, like, international companies. Like, I had that experience. I did understand that my work had to be sellable. There had to be a commercial element to it, but not in a way that felt gross, but
Yeah.
it's just the reality of what you do. And I feel like that's a lot of artists struggle with that, because it's hard to put a dollar value on. Again, it's a piece of you, it's a part of you, it's an expression of who you are. And I feel like that's a lot of the reason that people undervalue themselves a lot of the time, because they're like scared, like, oh, I don't want to charge too much, or I don't want to put it out there and no one buys it. And it's a really interesting like road to navigate when you are, working as, your art commercially, if you do have the intention to sell it, whether before, like something like I do, or after.
Yeah, absolutely. So here I have a question for you. So people that have a desire to travel and maybe have some artistic pursuits, and certainly the surfing that we share, which is just such a core part of who we are. If they looked at your design of your life, right, it feels like such an ideal. And I'm sure, of course, like everybody's experience, certain parts of it are just wonderful and certain parts of it are tough. The travel that you do, so you're staying for an extended period of time in Bocas del Toro. You've done over 300 murals in 8 countries. That travel also has a wear to it, kind of wearing down, whether it's mentally or physically. Do you have some routines, whether they're daily or weekly, to kind of help you maintain your well-being?
Oh, absolutely. I have some grounding practices in the morning. My little morning ritual for me is like super important. I'm going to grab things. So everywhere I travel in the world, I always bring like this little baggie that has the things that kind of ground me in the morning. This is the book I was telling you about, the 365 Tao. I've had this copy of this book for like over a decade, and it comes with me every single place that I go, and I read a page from it every morning. So that kind of is my morning practice. I read a page from this book, I write in my journal, and I pull cards. So right now, this is my journal. It's not, so I just write in it every morning. I feel like having that brain dump of creativity is it's really important for me as an artist, but just also to ground me and have a routine. And then I pull tarot cards as well. So these are the 3 things that no matter where I go in the world, like what I'm doing, I start my day the same way with these same items. And I feel like having something consistent in a somewhat inconsistent life is important. So that's a huge part of my process. And then also having Chi-Chi, like my little dog, I'll grab him.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure everyone, yeah. Having like a little creature that depends on me, that can come with me like everywhere I go. That's like having something like a piece of home. It's some consistency in an inconsistent life. So having my morning routine and being able to travel with my dog, like sometimes it does get tough, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months on the road, living out of a bag, living in hotels, moving. Like I actually was lamenting to a friend not too long ago, but since August of last year, I've moved 16 times. And, that's a lot. And I love it. Don't get me wrong. Like everywhere I've been has been awesome. I've done some amazing work. I've met fabulous people. I've surfed great waves. I've seen beautiful things, but that's a lot of time to be packing a bag, schlepping your things, unpacking the bag, staying. It does get a little old. And it's, as much as I love traveling, sometimes I just want to sleep in my own bed. Sometimes I don't want to move for a week. Like it's like that double-edged sword, So I feel like having my morning routine and having this little guy with me, like, just really helps with the amount of traveling that I do. But also being by myself, I'm single, I'm not married, I don't have kids, and so that makes it much easier for me to be able to just be like, all right, I'm moving, this amount of times in the next 2 months. And really all I have to do is coordinate myself and him, which isn't really an issue.
Yeah.
So it takes a little more planning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those decisions can be personal then too. You don't have to be weighing like, how is this going to positive or negatively influence someone else's decisions or someone else's life. And I can definitely connect with you on that level. Like we're not moving internationally, but I have this, both my wife and I, we have this nomadic part to us. So like we've been on the central coast of California now for 23 years. And in the 23 years that we've lived here, we've moved 19 times. And most of those, actually, if I think back, all of those times were our choice. Like maybe something was coming down the line that was going to change, and then we started looking and found another opportunity. And then we bought a house 8 years ago here, and we still moved. We rented it and we moved to another opportunity. We got to live in this almost, 100-year-old house, made of redwood, built by this craftsman. We're like, oh, let's go live there for a little bit. And now we're back in the house that we own, which is what I was talking about remodeling. And I am looking forward to being in one place. Since I moved out of my parents' house at 19, I haven't been in a house longer than 3 years. And there's a part of me that is really looking forward to just like, oh yeah, that thing is over there. I put that away there a year ago and it's still there.
Yeah, I get it. I'm in the same boat. I am.
But then there's some of that motivation of that is that desire to travel and have that experience. And it's everything in life is a balance, of course, right? Everything, and that's why this life that we are in now, where we're inundated with these images or this creation of this image from something, it looks so perfect, quote unquote, and you have to stop and really dive down and go, there isn't such a thing. There's positive parts and amazing things, and there's the negatives that come with it. And how do you balance those things within it to create a life for yourself that gives you those things that you're seeking, and to be open to new experiences and some of that consistency and routine. Like sometimes routine has such a bad negative connotation to it, but there's parts of it that primal part of your brain just loves that. Like there's some reassurance to it that maybe allows you to be open and creative and pursue other things because you have that. Like your morning routine. It's probably a crucial part.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just having discipline. It's a skill set. Like as a human being, it's very, very important to, commit to something, no matter how small it is, and just, commit to doing it every day, every week. Like whatever it is, it just keeps you accountable as well.
Yeah, I always like it, like your journaling. Like I've tried, oh my gosh, countless times over my life to try to journal. And about maybe like 4 years ago, as much as I wanted to physically be writing, I just found myself resisting it and fighting it, and I just couldn't do it. So for the last 4 years, every day I've written something. It's on my phone, but it's a way that I found, okay, I'm sticking to this practice now. And what I'm able to do because of that is track some of those details and get some of the things off of my head that I might be carrying. And it's also what I use it for, actually, that I really love, is to help reinforce some of the most positive memories that I have within a day or a week. So like every time I surf, I click it's a little surfing icon. And it's like, I surfed at this spot on this board. This is what the conditions were like. I saw Tim in the water. I saw Phil in the water. Waved at him, and it's just a way to remember maybe like a wave that really stood out to me, like, oh, that wave was that day. And so when I look back on it, it's just a way to connect yourself back to those positive experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge part of the reason that I journal, because I find that there's a lot of cyclical things that happen in life, and if I kind of flip back through a month previous or 2 months previous or however long, it's kind of like, or something that was bothering me 2 months ago, I'll look back and like, oh wow, that's funny. Like that's not even a thing anymore. It's interesting how you kind of connect dots too when you keep track, even in a small way. Keep track of like where you are, and I think it also helps you. You don't want to go back, look back to the past like too often, but I think it's very healthy to acknowledge where you've been, to understand where you are, and then to understand where you need to go. So it's just nice to have that little marker there, a little reminder. And it's just healthy practice for your brain as well. Just as you've always got, as humans, we've just got so much going on in here at any given moment. For me, there's something very therapeutic about getting what's going on here, like through my arm. And that's why I like the process of writing. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe that's also the reason I like painting, because it's also very meditative for me, is just to transfer all of this in here somewhere else, it's kind of also an act of release, an act of letting go. So it's important. It's a healthy thing to do. I encourage anybody to journal.
Yeah, it is that perspective, like looking back on something and having written something down that you were really struggling with, whatever the case may be, and then a few months later, or looking back and going, "Wow, like I can't believe I remember that feeling. I remember how tough that was for me." And now I can't relate to why that was so tough. Like just having that
Yeah.
perspective to know like this too shall pass. It's not that big of a deal, or you work through something that is maybe a little bit more significant, and that process helps you get to that place. So this is kind of along those lines. Like, are there areas in your life, whether it's creatively, physically, mentally, that you're actively working to improve on, like that you've identified, like I want to really kind of concentrate on improving that part of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, I just self-improvement, like self-actualization is just something that I constantly want to be working on. It's something I am always doing. And my study of the Tao in the morning and my journaling practice, like those are two really big components of that. But I'm not a religious person, but I'm definitely think of myself as spiritual, and of all the religions and spirituality practices that I've studied and become familiar with over my life, like the Tao and Taoism resonates the most with me. And there's so many wonderful philosophy. Well, the philosophy itself of the Tao is just for me a really wonderful way to live, and it just really puts a lot of. It's all about being simple, being mindful, but it's also puts a lot of self-responsibility and being responsible for who you are, and what the way you show up in the world. Because I feel like that I don't ever want to be like a victim in life. I always want to try to take responsibility for everything that's going on with me and be resolve it the best way that I possibly can, and in doing so, like become the best version of who I am. And that's always going to change. That's you don't just wake up one day and you're like, all right, I'm done, the work's over. Like that's something that's a lifelong pursuit, and it's going to take different forms. So for me, yeah, like the Tao is huge for me. And it's interesting, like of all the messages and the people that interact with me, like on Instagram and online and so forth, I post a passage, the book that I read the page from it every day, and I post it in my stories on Instagram every morning. I get above and beyond probably 3, 4, 5 times amount more messages relating to those posts than anything else. And for me, it's really interesting to see that an ancient Chinese philosophy that most people don't know anything about resonates so strongly with so many different people. So for me, it's like very rewarding to know too that I'm helping people understand that, hey, that's an option out there. Like you might not know what it is, but here, check out, this is a great place to get started. Check out this book. If you're interested, read this. Like, and again, that comes back to this collaboration piece that we're talking about. Like, I'm no expert on any of this, but it's helping me. It's encouraging me to be a better person. If I can help someone else along that path, then sure. I mean, why not? So, I mean, that's a big part of it. And then, yeah, just in general, I mean, I just feel as a human, like, I always want to be better at everything. Like, I want to be a better person. I want to be a better friend. I want to be like a better artist. I want to be a better surfer. And I'm not saying I have to be the best from an ego perspective, but I like self-improvement is something that I always want to strive for. I don't ever want to get content or comfortable with where I'm at, or think that I'm superior or better, or I've reached the summit and there's nowhere else to go. Like that's like never. You can always keep improving.
Isn't that so? Isn't that why surfing is so wonderful? It forces you to realize every time, like, that will never be the case. It does. Your ability or our performance is all relative. It's like it doesn't matter. Like you can never be better than you are in that moment, and that changes so much. I think that's why, like, this is a recurring theme on the show for sure. Anybody that comes on that's a
Mm-hmm.
surfer, it always comes out. That part of it is, I think that's why we're so attracted back to it, is if you need
Mm-hmm.
that reminder, you go and paddle, and you are in that moment and you
Mm-hmm.
realize, no, that sense of control that you were
Mm-hmm.
fighting to hold on to, first of all, is not possible, and it's not even important. And two, like, where you're here in this place and you're just trying to work within this, and you can't fight it. It will never work that way. And so that ability, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why I this is really a focused mission of mine, is just to help surfers keep that in their life till their last breath, because of what
Mm-hmm.
it gives us. It's so important.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's such a humbling practice. Like I'm so grateful for surfing. It's the, like as I said earlier, it dictates everything that I do in my life. It's all I want to do. If I had the choice and I could just surf all day every day, that's all I would want to do forever for the rest of my life. Unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case. I'm pretty close, but
Yeah,
it's like,
you're
but
more
there's
than
just
most.
something.
You're more than most.
It's just the ocean is just, it's a sanctuary. It's a humbling place. It's a beautiful place. You can go alone, you can go with friends and share the experience. You're in nature. Every session's going to be different. It there's it just it physically, it's a wonderful way to work out. Mentally, it's a wonderful way to, there's just, for me, there's so many positives about surfing, and I love it so much, and I'm so grateful for it. And it's hard to explain to people that don't surf, because I feel like a lot of the times, like, they just look at us like really puzzled, like, what are these people doing out there? Like, aren't you scared of sharks? Like, it's really cold. Like, why do you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and jump in the ocean? That's so weird. Like, they just don't get it. Like, you can't explain it to someone that doesn't. But it's once it gets you, like I said earlier, once the surfing bug got me, there was no turning back, and it's
Yeah.
only getting like stronger and stronger. And even now, like everywhere I go and all the places I stay, and even where I live, I see people like much older than me that are still surfing every day and still have that stoke. And I think it keeps you young on a lot of levels as well. Like, if you see people that are surfing regularly and living like a healthy like lifestyle around the beach and that, like, they just physically, they're in great shape. Mentally, there's always, you can always have an interesting conversation, because they're generally people that like to travel. They're pretty open-minded. They go with the flow. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be biased that surfers are like awesome or whatever, but I feel like in general we have a really a like a sport or hobby, pursuit, whatever you want to call it, that it's something that you can do no matter where you go in the world, I mean, as long as there's a coastline, and up to any age. So it's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too, and kind of touching on what you talked about earlier. Like, you started, when you were 19. I started surfing when I was 15. I grew up in California, but away from the coast a little bit. So my family didn't surf. Nobody in my family surfed. It's just something I knew I wanted to do. There was just something about it that
Mm-hmm.
I knew I wanted. And what's interesting about that is, same thing, growing up around, like, now that I live here, I'm seeing that, yeah, some of these groms are just like, they're surfing since they're like 4 or 5 years old. But what's interesting about that is, I've met a couple people in my life. Actually, one of them grew up in Lucadia. Joel Racine.
Yeah.
He was a friend of mine
Mm-hmm.
that I met through a friend up in Monterey Bay, and he surfed since he was young. He was competitive. He was kind of going on that path of, working towards trying to, become a professional surfer. And when I met him, we were 21 or 22. And maybe he's come back to it, but he was over it. He was over surfing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he had done it every day of his life and was just driven by it. And he got to this place where, it's hard to say you're burnt out at 21, but he's just like, I did it so much that I just stopped. And like I said, we're older now,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's come back around, but I thought to myself, like, wow, like, I would not want that experience either, because having it in my life is such a important part of keeping me healthy mentally and physically. And then as a side
Yeah.
note on that too, like, he hadn't surfed. Like, we were up in Monterey and there's obviously some great waves around, and I was going surfing. I was like, come surfing with me. And he hadn't surfed in, like, I don't know, it's a year and a half. and he got out there and he ripped. I was so mad. I was like, I'm never going to surf that well. Like, you haven't surfed in a year and a half, and I will never surf that well. He's like, muscle memory.
Yeah, yeah. I never went that stuff.
So tell me. Let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of your surfing. What boards do you generally ride? What kind of surf do you really like to surf? Like, what are some of the places that you love to surf? Let's talk surf story a little bit.
Yeah. So these days I am pretty much only on longboards. My smallest longboard's 8.8. My biggest longboard's 9.2, and I kind of go in between those. I actually last year I sold all my shortboards because I just wasn't riding them anymore. Mm-hmm. And I shortboarded when I first started. I've been surfing for 23 years. So the first, I'd say probably 10-ish years, I just rode shortboards. And like longboards, I always was in the mentality that it's just for small days. So on a tiny day, I'd paddle around on a log and whatever. When I moved to California, there was like definitely more influence on longboards there because like living in like North County, like it's just kind of loggy around there most of the time. And there's, a lot of wonderful shapers and a lot of like surf history in that part of the world relating to longboards. So my mind kind of opened a little bit more towards longboarding. But yeah, now I if I'm on anything less, like I still have a 6.8 and a 5.4 fish in my quiver. And if I'm on those, I still have fun, but I'm just like, I'm a longboarder now. Like, I don't really want to ride shorter boards. So here in Bocas, I only bought 2 boards just because it's kind of I love longboards, but traveling with them is kind of a nightmare. So I bought my 8.8 Takayama Noah Comp, which is like probably my all-time favorite board, which I ride almost all the time. And then I have this one. This is an 8.0 single fin Christensen Sea Bucket that I like to ride when it's a little bit bigger and a little bit steeper, the wave. Growing up in Australia on the Gold Coast, like right point breaks are kind of my jam. So I love point breaks. I love big, slow, like easy, fun waves. And when I say big, I mean nothing huge, like double, triple overhead. I feel pretty comfortable. But yeah, I like going. Obviously, I love going right, but here in Bocas, it's all lefts, so that's been really fun as well. Like just working on, going left, and also this is all reef. Like everywhere I've lived, it's been sand or rocky bottom, and so surfing, all lefts on a reef has been like an interesting challenge as well. Yeah. I'm kind of spoiled. I don't really ever have to wear a wetsuit, and when I do, I kind of complain about it. Because I'm always in warm water. Sorry, I know you're in Morro Bay. That's not a very nice thing to say.
It's just the way it is. It's the reality. If you want to surf, I paddled out like a few days ago, and it was like I checked the temp, and it was like it had been really windy here, and we get upwelling with that, and I looked at the temperature, and it was like 51 degrees.
Yeah.
And so that's the way it is year round.
Yeah. That's it. That's a bit of a different reality in this part of the world, but it suits me just fine. Like the wave, the quality of waves in Central America is pretty astounding. Like I've surfed, most of Costa Rica, Nica, Salvador, Guatemala, now in Panama, Mex. There's so many good waves here. Like it's just everywhere you go, there's good waves, good quality waves, warm water. Like for me, it's like I love it. Central America is just a magical place, and I feel so fortunate that I've been able to call this home for 12 years. So.
Yeah. It is just the wealth of waves and the amount of places that you can go really just feels almost endless. Like a lot of them now, of course, are popular and the numbers of people surfing there, but just to have that amount within that stretch there, you can find your way given the time and the patience.
Yeah, there's something for everyone. Like no matter what board you want to ride, what like type of wave, what kind of bottom, like there's such a variety here. Like it's such a small. There's a lot of countries, but it's a pretty small land area. And now, the Caribbean coast too, I'm just exploring this side of Panama, and I've barely scratched the surface. Like there's so much over here as well. So it's
what about the Caribbean side of Costa Rica? Have you done much surfing and travel on that side?
Yeah, I've surfed a little bit over there, but usually when I go over there, I don't go to surf. I just go to hang out. Like it's so magically beautiful. Like Puerto Viejo area, like all around there is just stunning. It's just like the most amazing tropical rainforest. Every type of heliconia and plant. There's sloths. You see at least one sloth a day. Like the beaches are just like magical, like palm trees leaning over. There are waves there, but it's just not very consistent. So I've surfed a couple of the spots over there. There's a fun little island off of Limon that gets pretty fun. There's a like Punta Uva's fun. I've never surfed salsa because it's never worked when I've been there, but that's one of the, it's a pretty standout wave in Central America. There's definitely wave options on that side. I just haven't really explored them. So.
So you talked about the 365 of Tao. Do you have any other books that you gift to friends or recommend that are like an important part of your life?
Yeah, that's a go-to for sure. I actually listen to a lot of audiobooks. When I'm working, sometimes I'm not really in the mindset to listen to music all the time, especially if it's a big job and I'm just doing hours and hours a day on the wall. I can get sick of my music. So I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks when I'm working, which is really awesome. So whichever audiobook I've got in the rotation, if I'm thinking of somebody or whatever, I'll forward the link to them. I just downloaded one recently, like a couple of days ago, and I just had a conversation with a friend about it and recommended it to her. It's called The Art of Letting Go. And it's just like really interesting about, just releasing, non-attachment, like a lot of Taoist philosophies. So that's one that I'm listening to. I also have pretty heavy in my rotation Jen Sincero's books. I love her. Audiobooks are awesome. And then my all-time favorite book in general, but audiobook that I listen to a lot and recommend to everybody is The Alchemist. I think it's just such a beautiful story. The guy who narrates it, I love his voice. For me, that's really important when I'm listening to books and podcasts. If the voice doesn't resonate, I can't listen, no matter how good the content is. So that's really important to me. But The Alchemist, it's always in rotation, and I recommend it to people as well, especially if you're going on a trip or you're going on an adventure, or you're at a point in your life. I just feel like it's a really beautiful story, and it can just be so relevant. I've recommended it to everybody. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it is such a wonderful time, like to be able to seek out, like whatever your interest is and your niche is, you can now find a podcast for it. It's just that ability to go down and connect or explore things that are outside of that niche and just try to explore within there too. And as much as I read every day, and like we talked earlier, that tangible part of having it in your hand, but it is something about the audiobook and of course it brings in the auditory part of it, and it's part of that experience and the performance of it. And a lot of times I tend to gravitate in whether it's biography or something in an audiobook, but every so often I'll listen to something that's maybe like, I kind of came late in life to fantasy fiction. It wasn't something that I was really interested in when I was younger. And as I got older, I started really, if I put it down to something, I value that it's completely separate from your reality. There's something to be able to get deep down into that allows you to kind of leave something else behind, maybe that you're working on or struggling with, and you just go into this experience. And it is like audiobooks to do that. A voice artist that can do that, especially multiple characters, like you get lost in this world, and then you finish and you come back to your reality and you're like, wow, that person captivated my attention for like the last 2.5 hours. Like that's an amazing skill.
Yeah, I agree.
Are you still consuming copious amounts of bitch and chipotle sauce in your life?
Only when I'm in San Diego. I can't get it here, unfortunately. Oh my gosh, when I discovered that, I was like, oh man, this is amazing. And they're right there. They're in like North County. Like they're like right where I live or stay when I go back to California. So, they're local as well. This is epic.
That was going to be my follow-up question. I'm like, are you getting that down in Central America? Like, that would be really surprised. Like, it made it up to us, and it's like Costco level sizes of bitchin' sauce, and we found them. I was like, oh, I'm going to try this, and I was like, oh my gosh, and like We'll go when we go see friends. You know, I'm like, let's go see if you have this at your local store or Costco. I'm gonna
Yeah.
blow your mind right now.
No, Chipotle is my favorite flavor for like spice. I love spicy food, but Chipotle, it's not super spicy, but I just like that bite with the smokiness.
Yeah.
So yeah, once I found that bitchin sauce, it was over. It was on everything.
I know. I forced myself like, okay, don't put the bitchin' sauce on this. Like, I know it'll taste great, but you just give yourself a break for a minute. Well, Pepa, thank you so much for being on the Surf Strong Elite Show. I really appreciate you taking the time. Anybody that's listening, you can find Pepa on at Pepa Llama on Instagram. Her website's also pepalama.com. Any other place that they could find you, or those are the two best places?
Those are the two best places. But yeah, I'm Pepa Llama on everything, so I'm not hard to find.
Yeah, and I do want to. First of all, your profile picture on Instagram, it gets voted best ever. I love that. It's perfect.
Oh, I love a good wipeout. I'm pretty good too. I tell you what. I catch a lot of waves, but I wipe out. You know, you got to pay to play, right?
Absolutely.
So, and I just always try to yeah.
So we didn't really talk about your Instagram that much because, of course, the other things that we talked about are just more important, like more interesting to me. But I do have to say, like, some people just do it really well. Like, you do it really well. Like, just different musicians and stuff that I'll follow. Like Patti Smith, if you're a fan at all. I think it's that those that come from the creative space and use that medium to convey those things in that way. Just make for an interesting time. We live on some social media in our businesses and it's not really my favorite part of it, of course. But like when I do come across, it's kind of how I found you. It's kind of how I first got introduced to you was through that medium. And so there is some positive parts to that. I have to make sure I don't go too much into my old curmudgeon tendencies that I might have and go like, this is a way to discover some really interesting people. So I do love seeing the stuff that you put up and how you frame it. And it feels like just an extension of your creative self.
Well, thank you, because that's my intention behind it. It's just, you know, it's obviously everything online is curated, but it's just the curation of, you know, my work and a little bit less of who I am. I just want my work to speak for itself. And that's one of the reasons, like, I've been on Instagram for as long as I can remember, like more than I think like 10 years or something, because back in the day, it was just photos. You know, there was no words, there's no opinions, there was no anything. It was just photos. And I just wanted to look at pretty things. And I just curate my feed that way. All I really want to look at is surfing, art, you know, travel destinations. And so I use it as a tool to, you know, see things that inspire me. And then I'm very fortunate, like I get a lot of business on Insta. When you do, you know, when you're a visual artist, as you know, I am, I don't want to talk about what I do. I just want to put photos up so you can see for yourself, like, this is what I do. Here's where I go. This is my style. Here's the colors I like. Here's, you know, my influences, all that. Do you like it? Great. Give me a follow. If you don't, great. Don't worry about it. Like, that's what I feel like. You have the power to curate what you're looking at. And I think that social media can have be a very positive experience if you want it to be. And in my experience, it is. And I think a lot of visual artists would agree on that, because it's a way we can connect. Like, I've got a ton of artist friends on Insta that I've never met, but we just love each other's work and we send each other messages and we support each other. It's like, it's a nice way, again, to collaborate and create a sense of community with like-minded people. Yeah. So no, I feel very fortunate. I actually enjoy it for what it is. Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate those kind words.
Well, thank you. Thanks again for taking the time. I appreciate you being on the show, and keep getting some great surf, and have a great day.
Yes, I will. You too. Thank you so much, Greg. Appreciate it.
All right, so thank you for joining us on the Surf Strong Show. Conversations for a healthy community. I'm your host, Greg Finch. I'd like to remind you to like, comment, subscribe to this and all of our episodes of the Surf Strong Show wherever you get your podcasts. For all show notes and links that we talk about in the episodes, videos of the podcast, you can go to surfstrongfit.com/podcast for this and all the past episodes. Thanks for joining us. It really means a lot.